Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to this latest episode of British Culture, Albion Never Dies. Today, L is for London. There really wasn't any other choice for what could L stand for in the alphabet of Britishness. L for London was suggested by Matt Spacer of bondsuits.com. It was suggested by Ladies Who Bond, who I interviewed on YouTube very, very recently, getting her perspective on the latest Bond film, No Time to Die. Kid Bond fan on Instagram also made the suggestion, and a couple of others that I'll get to later on in the episode. And in the Facebook group, Britain, People, Places and Pastimes, Mary suggested this, getting 3 likes. Obviously some good support. L is for London. And it was also suggested by the man who runs London Sands. This is a company which focuses on printing, graphic design, motion graphics, video editing, creative print. It's a very, very creative company based in London, has London in the name, and the man who runs it is my brother. So I was looking at his stuff. He was telling me what was coming up, and he was doing some London-inspired kind of graphics. And so, yeah, that actually helped inspire me. I've mentioned in this podcast before that I really don't know London so well. I had a deep dive of Britain, not just London, a little while ago with my friend Kane, and neither of us really knew London that well. So here I can ask my brother, who's lived there many years. As I say, he's got a London-based business, London Sands, and you can find him on Instagram and see all the kind of images that really inspired me. But I also felt I needed help. I really don't know London that well. So I asked my good friend who runs the British Bond Addict account on Instagram, would you mind helping me out? And he was very, very, very generous with his time. So a big part of this episode is my interview with British Bond Addict, who I previously interviewed back in February for the first time, I think, to the 7 Pillars of Britishness, an interview with Instagram's British Bond Addict. And then in June, British Bond Addict talking about Bond, James Bond. So really I go back for the good stuff. So Chris, who is based in London, again, he really helps me kind of get a good idea of what it's really like, well, to live in London, something I don't know. And I also asked somebody based in London, somebody who you should be listening to if you don't, Pete Brooker from Tailors with Love. So he will also chip in a little bit later in the episode. So first, the interview with Chris, British Bond Addict. Then I'll be running through some of the other L's in the alphabet of Britishness, and then we'll hear from my good friend Pete Brooker from Tailors with Love. But as I say, all of this is inspired by my brother's company, London Sands. That was a deep well of inspiration for me, and yeah, check it out. But first, here is Mr. British Bond Addict. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining me again. You are British Bond Addict on Instagram, is that right?
Indeed, yes, that is correct, and thank you again for having me on. It's been an interesting couple of subjects we've been talking about, especially as my username might suggest. We're very much looking forward to the topic of conversation tonight.
Yeah. I mean, if we start straight away from Bond and London, because London is it, that's what we're talking about. It is L is for London. Bond always goes to London, and we almost never see it.
Yes, it's up until, I'd say, Skyfall, what you see of London is stock footage and then the inside of a set, really. And yeah, I can understand with London in the 60s and 70s, yeah, possibly progress the story on to, let's say America for Live and Let Die, or Jamaica for Thunderball. Yes, but let's move the story on as quickly as possible. It's interesting for quite early on in the series for how someone was so quintessentially British. It's interesting quite how little it's brought up. I mean, obviously, we know the earlier films were kind of like globe-trotting adventures. There's a nice bit of escapism. So, of course, why would you go to the cinema to watch London where you're living already and it's pretty dreary and rainy because it's, London? The thing I find interesting is obviously the books franchise. It has a lot more in Britain. Moonraker, the entire book is set in Britain. You go down to it, starts off in London, have quite an extended scene there, goes down to Kent, spends some time in Dover. So it's always interesting how the book and the film franchise treat London quite differently. But yes, I'd say up until Skyfall, I'd say that's probably the most London we've had in a film. We spend a lot of time there. We go for the tube lines. Obviously, we get all the London cliches. And if you consider, of course, this was happening just after the 2012 Olympics and for Bond's 50th anniversary, it did kind of become a celebration of Britain. And one of my favourite things in London at the time, actually, as well as around, they had it's basically the London buses were changing, and the first new London bus was in the Bond film. It was a huge thing of excitement. Everyone was on the edge of their seats. But all the old London buses had these huge Union flag displays with Daniel Craig in the DB5 and saying Bond is Great Britain. And I always loved those. It's a really striking piece of art. I posted it on my Instagram, God, a year or so ago now, just because it always stuck in my mind. And it's interesting how, the Bond which was celebrating being Bond was the one with the most London scenes. I've always found that interesting, especially considering Bond is Scottish.
Scottish heritage. Yeah, but he's Great Britain, not just he is England.
Exactly. That's the thing. That's because when I made my account, I made British Bond Addict, and I had quite a few friends going, "Oh, why is it not English Bond Addict?" And I've never considered myself English more than being British. Like, I don't know if it's a very, I feel from some people it's a very old-fashioned point of view apparently, but I've always considered myself British. I have fantastic friends who are Scottish, I have fantastic friends who are Welsh, Northern Irish, and even Irish itself, even though they're not part of the United Kingdom obviously. And I've always considered it a unity sort of thing. Like, I'm sure quite a few people would like to be separate from Britain, and it's not as if there's national holidays about that, but like, I've always considered the Scottish, the Welsh, the Irish, I've always considered that quite a nice harmonious sort of like thing. Like, I as some of you may know, I do motor racing on the side. Essentially, I'm semi-professional, and every time I do that, I race under the British flag, and that's never been in doubt. I had the opportunity to do English flag, and straight away British flag. I mean, my helmet, even that is British colours, and an attempt at the Union Jack, for example. So even in that sense, it's always been British to me. It's weird. It's never been a specifically English thing. I think just because I like Britain as a whole, really. I've never considered, like, even when it comes to football, if it's England versus Scotland, I'm just happy if one of them wins. And normally that means it's a 0-0 draw.
Oh, what is it? There's a suggestion we could have a Great British team, and in which case we'd have, the English football team, the Scottish fans, and Ryan Giggs.
Oh, Ryan Giggs, that's going to show our age, unfortunately, if we say that.
Oh, yes. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it's interesting. So I do love the United Kingdom as a whole, and I did a podcast previously on England, Britain, not just London, but I haven't covered London at all because I have to admit I really don't have the experience. I've got very little to say. I have been there for work and for pleasure, and for, it's an iconic city. I find it quite strange. I see it much more in the media, and then I go and I'm like, oh, I've seen that on TV. But you're a bit closer to London, is that right?
Yes, well, that's the thing. I'm living in Chertsey. I'm a very short train ride away from Waterloo, which is kind of the main station, should we say, in England for domestic travel. But I've always been dipping my foot in London. Essentially, it's always been there throughout my entire life. And it started with my dad working there. He spent his time working for the civil service, and he spent a lot of time up in London. And from a very young age, he wanted to make sure that me and my brother weren't kind of terrified of large spaces and lots of crowds. So he took us up very early, and it worked. I'm desensitized to crowds. I've never found London a scary place, which many people do, because I was raised in a bit more of a country town. It's a very different comparison. Yeah. He lived there because it's basically right on the commuter route, so he could go straight from there to London in the mornings. And even though it's like 60 miles or so, trains are normally quite decent normally, so he could get there on time. So I spent quite a lot of time in London when I was younger. And then university, I went up to Watford, which is just above London, basically. And it's, again, a very easy train ride in. And most of my good friends I'd made at school back in Alton, which is where I grew up, they all went to London. I had friends going to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, another friend going to Imperial. So I had quite a big basis there. And that was a really interesting moment. So I was living in Watford, but most of my weekends would be spent in London. I'd go and see my friends. I'd chill with them for a little bit. I had one friend living in Paddington for a while, so I got to know different parts of London quite well. And I was quite sheltered when I was younger because I assumed London was, if you know the river, the embankment, it's got all the things. You can see the Gherkin, you can see Tower Bridge, you can see Big Ben with or without scaffolding, depending when you go. And when you see that, you think, wow, London is bustling. If you go a mile in any direction, it's completely different. And I said this to you before we start the show. I feel London as a city is very different to any American or possibly even, I don't know about China, but I feel like the Chinese cities like Beijing, Shanghai, I feel like it's a very different style of city. London is so big in comparison to how small Britain is. It waters down so massively the further out you go. You can still be in London and be in the absolute middle of nowhere. Essentially, it will just be kind of more of a cityscape. But I feel most of the stuff that people know about London, like Canary Wharf, all those sorts of things, they're all quite close to the river, and that's cinematically the most we see London, really. So
it's all quite walkable, isn't it? All the things that you normally see on TV or in movies, you can walk between these landmarks quite happily.
Absolutely. That's the thing, there's so many walking tours in London because, as you say, it's just so damn walkable. It actually adds a bit of realism to go back to Bond. Surprise, surprise. One Craig runs from, oh gosh, what station is it? I think is it Embankment Station? When he runs from the District line over to the Hall, yeah, that's doable. That's completely believable. And the fact he gets there not really out of breath, yeah, that's also believable too. So yeah, it's interesting quite how compact it is, especially the main feature, shall we say, feature London is very compact. But then London just goes on for a long time. I'm technically, I don't know for those of you who know, London is surrounded by a road called the M25, and that basically contains London. If you're inside that, you're technically inside London. I'm just inside by like a whisker, so I'm technically in London here. And this borough is called Runnymede. Lots of Magna Carta stuff here, all that jazz. But that basically is considered to contain the M25. And if you look at where I am here, as opposed to what is 16 miles that way, which is Waterloo, it's it's chalk and cheese. To be fair, I actually have the River Thames about 200 meters that way from where I'm staying. I'm literally right on the river, and it's unrecognizable to what you might see on the embankment.
I knew you were the right person to call. Literally the Thames right out there.
Yeah, that's it. I go over the bridge. I go over the bridge to the Thames. I go to work every morning, and I come back that way too. So every day I'm crossing the Thames, which is might be the most British thing ever.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that is fantastic. My experience with London, one of them is that I was with my university Royal Naval Unit, and I was sent to spend a bit of time with the one based in London, and actually took a naval ship down the Thames. And it was quite hard not to just stare around at all these famous things that you're navigating. I'll just use them for navigation as an excuse.
Yeah.
But it is an iconic route. As you say, everything is so close together. And that is a big difference between, say, American cities, especially because in America, for the cities that I'm used to here on the West Coast, everything's so spread out. You need a car. It's not walkable. Whereas in London, a car's not really an advantage, I find.
No, I've driven through London quite a few times. I used to, as I say, I had a friend in Paddington, and I drove down to see them quite frequently on most weekends. And yeah, the drive was always fine until you're about 5 miles from the centre of London, and then it would just be standstill. And it's the sort of thing there'd be times where if I knew it was bad, I'd park the car outside and take public transport, because the tube is actually pretty effective in London. The tube is a godsend. I mean, that's incredible. So yeah, there's quite a few things like that. And as you say, talking about going down the Thames. For my 21st birthday, which was far too long ago, my mum got me they basically got me on a boat ride going up and down the Thames, and it did the route from The World Is Not Enough, and you know, that amazing scene. And you're right, one boat trip and you tick off so many of the major locations. It's slightly different to walking it, obviously, but you get a better view from the middle of the Thames. And like, that's the thing, whereas you're going down, you go under Tower Bridge, you go past St Paul's Cathedral. If you go down to right where the O2 is, or formerly known as the Millennium Dome, you tick off so many landmarks. And to be fair, you don't actually. Something I found very interesting about, I think it's New York's where the Lady Liberty is, right? Is that New York? Something I found interesting is that Lady Liberty is great to look at. Terrible if you visit the island, because apparently if you visit the island, it's like, I just can't see anything.
The Burj Khalifa in Dubai is the same. And in front of the Burj Khalifa, you have the tallest the fountain in the world as well. And so lots of people go to stand at the foot of the fountain, so then you're just craning your neck up. You don't know how high that is. So I walked around the big thing and sat opposite, so you've got a bit of perspective when you look at it.
I imagine with the Burj Khalifa, you probably well, I know how tall it is. I imagine if you're looking at the bottom, you can't actually see too much, because it's curving inwards, isn't it? It's essentially a pyramid, so you can't really see anything at all.
Exactly, it just disappears. So but a little way out, and you do get a very good view. There's a big pond, lake structure of water in front of it, and you can walk around that and actually get a really nice view of it. But it seems surprisingly not popular to do. But yeah, that route past the O2, that's what I navigated, and I say I feel blessed to have done it. But at the time, you can't help just look.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But the thing as well, there's one pub, I've forgotten what it's called. Oh gosh, it's right on the embankment. There's one pub where if you take a picture on your phone, it's like the most British postcard ever. It lines up in such a way you can see St Paul's, Tower Bridge. You can also see part of Big Ben and just a bit of the London Eye as well. And normally there's a bridge right in front of it, and of course there's red buses going over it constantly. I remember sitting there for lunch and I was like, this looks false. This looks artificial. How British this one shot is. It's incredible.
Yeah.
But it just shows how compact that, like, for London, which is such a big city, it is the main features that we see so much are so compact.
Everything's in one place. And yeah, I walked over the bridge going to the Houses of Parliament once, and I was wondering, oh, what if a double-decker bus passes me? That would be the most British thing ever. I don't know. There was double-decker bus after double-decker bus, black cabs, all sorts.
Yeah, there's museums dedicated just to Tower Bridge itself. That place has seen a huge amount of stories over the years.
Yeah. Have you? I mean, it's interesting. You live in London. As I was cautioning myself there, but anyway, you live in London, and do you ever go on these walking tours? Have you been to these museums? Because often, if you live in a place, you don't go to them.
Yeah, it's the thing is, I go to London reasonably frequently, and the places I go to, I just end up going past these places. Often, if I want to go see in a place, then I will do that. But most of my knowledge came from my parents taking me on open top buses when I was younger. Now, I said I was raised in the country. My cousins were super raised in the country, like farmer, that sort of thing. So they come up to London with us quite frequently, and we do lots of open top bus tours just because it's a great way to see all of it. And being on that bus gave me a proper idea of how to navigate around London, so I can picture myself normally quite well. It depends really. If I want to see the sights, I'll walk. If I've got to get somewhere, I'll take the tube. Because if you walk, you're gonna bump into these things. And recently, I met up with two very good friends. One is Melanie of Bird James Bird, who came to London, and another one was Zafran, who also has a fantastic Instagram account. And we went to places like Duke's. We went to the Burlington Arcade, which had all this James Bond stuff happening. And there's a moment where, like, okay, we could take the tube, and it'll be a 2-minute ride, and we'll get there. Or we could take 7 minutes, and I know it goes past Oxford Circus. And of course, when you know where the things are, you're more inclined just to take the lazy walk. And for those who don't know what Oxford Circus is, it's this massive, basically like advertising, like this. It's just the biggest electricity bill in the world, I'm sure. It's basically this huge advertising board, and it's become quite famous just as kind of a location. And of course, as you're walking, Mel, who is American, hadn't been to Britain since she was about, I think, early 20s or so, around that time. So it's been a few years. And she was, and yeah, as you're doing the walking, you get the red buses going past and the cabs going past. So yeah, it's interesting how just walking, you'll see a sight at some point, whether or not if you choose to. So it's not you're walking to see the sights, you just happen to go past them if you choose to walk.
That is interesting, and it's wonderful when you can guide people around a place that you know well, show them the highlights.
I made it sound like I was guiding. Zafran knows it much better than me. Is guy walking past and going, oh, this is where William Shakespeare did so and so. And London has a huge culture, but a very traditionalist culture in some ways. But yes, we have lots of things we don't forget about in London.
Yeah. I remember, obviously, I haven't lived in London. I've been to some of these sites just because I'm going to London specifically to see it, right? My father once said that every Englishman must go to the Tower of London twice, once when you're a child and once when you're a parent.
Yeah. Well, in my case, it'll be as a school teacher, because we're constantly doing school trips up to London. So,
what are your favourite places to guide kids around?
Natural History Museum is always one. The Natural History Museum, which is full of lots of artifacts that aren't necessarily ours. It's always an interesting one because the kids going like, oh, it's going to be a boring museum trip. And when you walk in, you've got this massive skeleton of a dinosaur looking down at you, and that immediately captures them. And it's amazing to see just the grandiose element of this. It is a museum, of course it is. But to see so many different parts that you've seen in textbooks for so long, like in year 4, you do lots of stuff about Egypt, and you see all these pictures of Tutankhamun, and you see the pharaohs and the sarcophaguses, all this sort of thing. To see it in a textbook, I feel like kids don't really gain. They don't really gain an appreciation for quite how amazing it is. Seeing a proper sarcophagus and seeing it in person, without a doubt, that's always the most silent moment of the trip. It always catches them off guard when you see it in person, and that's got to be one of my favorites, just because it's always such a fantastic learning experience, and there's always so much enjoyment from it, which is precisely what you want from the Natural History Museum. I mean, another one that's good for that too is the Science Museum. That's a bit more active, and there's more active learning, shall we say, in that case. But it's another great example of actually just having the facilities and just showing such amazing learning. And from a teacher's point of view, if you can get kids involved in any kind of education, that's always going to be a big plus for me. So for those two, I'd say are my favourites.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? So London has so much interesting history, but what a lot of English people go for are natural history and science.
Yes, yeah. It's the thing. It's because there's so many separate museums. Like you can go to the Fleet Air Arm Museum, which is just in the outskirts of London, and that's an amazing place to look at World War II aircraft and such. But it's very specific. Natural history and science, such vague topics of music, like such vague museums. There's going to be something for everybody there, and that's why it works. And also, lots of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily know. I mean, if you go to the Fleet Air Arm Museum and you don't like World War II aircraft or even modern military aircraft, you're not going to find anything.
Absolutely. It's almost as if you have a podcast on YouTube about British culture and you might be covering Turkish coffee, you might be covering Jaffa cakes, traveling around the UK or London. The broadest terms of references are genuinely the best.
One of those sounds entertaining. Don't worry about that.
So I have to ask, because you are a British Bond addict, what's your favourite kind of Bond site in London? There's a few. Yeah,
there's actually, to be fair, it's gained with recent years, especially from the Brosnan era onwards. I must say the 21st I referenced earlier, going down the Thames because it did one basically slow guide, and then when you got to the O2, full power, turn the boat around, smashing back down again. That was incredible. So if you're a Bond fan, I can't suggest that experience enough. I think just seeing the MI6 building, which is the MI6 building, it's not like it's not a set, it is actually there, and it is genuinely the MI6 building. I'm not sure what the national security is. Seeing that is always quite an interesting experience, because there's so many establishing shots in the Bond films where you see that part, and of course it gets blown up in Skyfall. You see it as a wreck inspector. You see quite a few scenes inside of the Brosnan era. That's always quite something. That's always seeing that and seeing it's much bigger in person than it looks on screen, bizarrely. Yeah, that's always one for me. I always get a rise out of the O2, even which was the Millennium Dome at the time, because knowing Brosnan falling down that scene, which is quite iconic, I've always enjoyed. But actually, one that I visited recently that really took my breath away, with my two Bond friends. We went to Duke's, which is a bar very in the middle of nowhere of London. You have to deliberately find it. And it's got the most incredible bartender, Alessio Palazzi, I believe his name is. He's somebody who's met all of the Bonds. He's met numerous famous people, and he is the nicest person ever. We talked to him, we said, "Oh, we're Bond fans, we're here." And he's like, "Right, that's it." And he just talked to us for like 30 minutes about the stuff that he's picked up over the years. And the reason it's noticeable, Duke's, is because not only did they do fantastic cocktails, but actually Ian Fleming spent a lot of time there when he was writing some of the Bond books. And while he might not have necessarily wrote the Bond books there because he wrote them in his apartment in Jamaica called Goldeneye, it's expected that while he was having cigarettes and chilling with his friends, there would have been numerous concepts, brainstorming ideas. And it's a very old-fashioned bar, because bars back then would often be a place in London especially, would be a place for people to meet up and talk in private. So they wouldn't be very big. And this one bar would be, I'm currently in my studio apartment at the moment. This would dwarf it. This is much bigger than that one room. It's very close together, mainly so you don't have to talk very loudly. And so if there's anybody else there, it's incredibly obvious. So it's a nice, interesting bit of security. They've had to extend it slightly, but it's still very small altogether. And when you're there, it's a very interesting atmosphere. It's very, I don't want to say retros, because retro makes you think 80s. This is really going back to the 40s and the 30s here. It's a really different time of history. Just from the way the building's constructed, it's a lot shorter, very narrow, as I've said. And the people who served us the drinks there take so much pride in their work. I mean, I ordered a type of a martini, essentially. It's called the Odd Job, and is done with a very specific type of vodka, little bits of all extra bits here and there, and they take the pride. They come out with all the glasses and stuff. They make the cocktail in front of you. They explain exactly what's being made as you're having it. And I was going there expecting it to be, okay, this is one of those Bond things. Quite a few things with James Bond, it's about the name. Like, I'm not trying to sound bad here, but Tom Ford stuff is expensive because it's Tom Ford, not because it's necessarily much better quality than something else of a similar stature. I was expecting this to be the same sort of thing. I'm going to pay like 20 quid. I'm going to pay £25 for a cocktail here. It'll be a standard thing. I'm going here just to say I've been to Duke's. They blew me away. That place was completely worth all of the price. The care and attention they give, just the atmosphere and how nice it was to be there. And the fact, they take the time to talk you through everything. If you're interested, you can obviously ask questions, and they're so willing to talk about it. it was something where meeting the people afterwards improved the experience more. So it was a lovely cocktail. It was a great evening. But then having such open conversation with the bartenders and the bar chief, yeah, it improved it massively. And just knowing that Fleming was there was always quite a cool idea, really. So that was one for me. That's one that's gone up to the top. That's gone very high on my list in a very short amount of time. That's for me personally.
That sounds like a fantastic experience and very much a Fleming-esque place. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a shame. I say this. I'm not a smoker. It's a shame there wasn't almost like the low hanging smoke from the evenings of that. It felt like it would have suited that, but I would have been coughing and spluttering, so maybe not the best idea.
Oh, that sounds like a fantastic experience and good to share with fellow fans.
I'd say we're very good share friends, and I'd recommend with anybody who's a Bond fan, or even people who just like particularly good cocktails. I'd recommend it highly.
Fantastic. Well, if I have good fortune to visit London, I'll be messaging you.
Well,
so you can take me to it.
I say first round's on me then.
Agreed. Have I lived in Yorkshire too long? Yeah, I was going to mention the prices of cocktails in London. It is an expensive city. Someone once described it as the best city in the world if you're a millionaire.
Yes. It's an interesting thing. I lived just outside the M25, which I alluded to earlier, and the price of a pint of beer is about £4, something like that. I'm now just inside the M25, and I've got two restaurants that are either side of the Thames just here. One's the Kingfisher, one's the Bridge. Inventive name next to the bridge. And yeah, just being inside that road as opposed to outside, the price goes up by like £2, and that's just being inside the M25. Get closer to London, yeah, you're going to get fleeced. It's pretty expensive for everything that you need to be 18 or older to buy. If it's like normal stuff, you can get along pretty well. If you go to what's it called? If you go to Covent Garden and often try some of the food there. If you go to the properly over the top restaurants where you'd be expecting to have a bottle of wine, yes, it's going to be a bit pricey. If you go somewhere a little bit off the beaten track, cheaper food at just as good quality. It's obviously, takeaway food for an example, but you get some great examples there. And in Camden especially, they pride themselves on alternative, just interests. And you can go there and have like an ostrich burger or something really bizarre. It's an incredible thing. It's not so expensive that I'm not going to do it just in case. It actually almost invites you to try it, with all these weird different type of foods. There's quite a few things I find interesting about London if you go to specific locations. And this has actually been commented by one of my very good friends, Melanie, we mentioned earlier. She comes from Louisiana in America. And Louisiana is always known as it's always been kind of like a mixing pot of culture. They've got lots of French, Creole, lots of Americans, lots of Spanish cultures all coming together. And this is represented by their food. I mean, the dish of Louisiana is a gumbo, which is a mix of so many different things bubbling along, and it makes a lovely end goal. This I feel, is also quite similar to London, not in the same extent where historically it's as significant, but there's so many different parts of London where little bits of different cultures come together and make something truly magnificent. The types of curries you can have in certain locations, the type of different foods you can have from all sorts of cultures, like having duck wraps, having everything. It's interesting how many different cultures can thrive in London. And this is shown not only in takeaway food, but actually in restaurants that you see in London too. I mean, London has one of the highest percentage of restaurants, I think, per square foot. Everywhere you go, it's either a restaurant or a pub. It's one of the two. And while the pubs normally retain being pretty British, there'll probably be a few different foreign wines and maybe a few different beers. The restaurants, if you're in the middle of London and you say you want a particular type of food, you can probably get there within 500 meters. It's amazing just how many different cultures thrive, especially on food there in London. It's really, I always find that quite incredible.
That's an interesting point because a lot of British people are very self-deprecating about our food culture, and kind of the idea that Britain has terrible food seems to have taken root all around the world as I've travelled. And yet, when I go back to Britain, I'm always astonished by what good food there is. And as I look into traditional British cooking and try it myself, I think it's wonderful. It's one of the strangest stereotypes in that I can't work out what is the origin of this stereotype.
I think it's interesting because most of the one of the national foods of Britain is chicken tikka masala, which obviously is a curry, but actually it's a British curry. It's actually one that's been created over here. And it's so far away from regular curries in India that actually it's not even comparable. It's one of these amazing things. I think Britain, when it comes to food, it's because I also agree, I'm very self-deprecating about British food. I'll be the first person to hop on that bandwagon. Don't you worry about it. I think it's because the food doesn't have much possibly much elegance about it to talking away. For example, like one of our most popular dishes is a full English breakfast, which is basically just all the good flavors in one plate. There you go. Okay, it's good, but it's there. Something I made recently, and something I love cooking. I love making food. It's something there have been days where I come home from work, get in about 5 o'clock, and I'll cook until 9 o'clock just to see like what I'll be making. And I've been making toad in the hole recently. Is that a dish you're familiar with?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. So toad in the hole, for those who don't know, doesn't contain toad or a hole. It's basically sausage in like a Yorkshire pudding mix, and then you serve it with a traditional red onion gravy. And the thing is, it's a dish I got wrong so many times, but the time you got it right, it's almost like it doesn't announce itself. It's a very hard dish to make because you need to get everything in the right temperature and then cook it properly. So when it's right, it is very nice, but it looks like it should be very easy, which I think follows up with most of British cuisine. Because it doesn't look difficult, it doesn't have the gravitas of possibly something that might look a little bit more complicated. But actually, if you've made it and it's gone wrong numerous times, you've realized quite how it works out at the end. So I think that's one of the things of British cuisine is, the end result may taste good, but it looks like it's reasonably easy to get there, when actually that might not be the case, which in itself, we had a conversation about what makes what are the pillars of Britishism. I think one of them would be not complaining about making something and just serving it, and not talking at all about all the things you had to go through to make it. Being far too polite to get result.
We have hidden depths. We make hard things look easy.
Exactly. There you go.
Yeah, it's also not showy, is it? It's not pretentious, for want of another word.
It's the sort of thing where it's not pretentious, which works against it, because if you think of like sometimes you love some pretentious. I don't know about you. Sometimes every now and then I just like being a little bit pretentious. Okay, I like
nice stuff. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. There's not a sort of high-end British food I would feel personally. There's not something that you go for something over the top, really, but for just getting the job done, for keeping calm and carrying on, as I'm sure many British people would say, it works pretty well on that front.
You hit on something interesting there. I talked with my friend Kane about British fashion, and so many things were kind of royalty did this, and then it trickles slowly down to everyone else. Food seems to be almost the other way. That for many, city workers, we like a ploughman's lunch.
Yes. Oh, of course. Oh, that's the thing. And a ploughman's. My family in Dorset, which of course is quite countryside location. A ploughman's top of every single menu, still constantly there. And there's a sense of traditionalism, as we talked about before. Ploughman's is always there. I'm sure as a Yorkshire lad, you'll enjoy that.
Yeah, and there's Cornish pasty, right? Literally a food you can shove into a workman's pocket to go down the mine, and that's become, well, now it's a terribly high-end thing, but the origins, again, it's going from the ground up, going from the roots.
And that's something as well. You hit on it again. I'm going back to Dorset, and I've got big roots there. In Dorset, because it's quite close to Cornwall, it's on the Jurassic Park of the coast, as they call it. There are people who drive to Cornwall, pick up genuine, authentic Cornish pasties, drive them back, then cook them and sell them in Dorset. Now, of course,
wow.
if you have a Cornish pasty in London, unless it's actually from Cornwall, it's just a pasty. A genuine Cornish pasty is from Cornwall, and there are companies still surviving today that will make their livelihood by picking them up, and then driving them back based on location only.
Wow. Okay, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think that they're everywhere in Dorset. Genuine Cornish pasties, they're there. Yeah, it's almost as frequent as pubs the closer you get to Cornwall. Honestly, it's incredible.
So you can tell how close you are to Cornwall by how many proper Cornish pasty shops there are.
If this is Cornwall, it's pasty, and then nothing.
Okay. Huh. Is there any big highlight of London that you'd really recommend anyone if they visited for the first time? Something.
There's one thing in particular I would suggest, and it's a trip on the London Eye, because at the top of the London Eye, obviously it's, without being obvious, you get to see a lot of London, but you get to see all the landmarks in one pod. The London Eye is a completely opposite, for those who don't know, basically a giant Ferris wheel. But the pods you're in, as opposed to sitting down, you have this entire pod of similar size to the room I'm sitting in right now, which is all completely transparent. And it's very slow. You've got lots of time, and you can see anything you want to see in London. the ability to look at the very top, the very apex of that ride, just to look and be able to see everything. If you like, they have maps in the pods as well, so you can see exactly what everything is. The ability to see all of it, and then the horizon stretching out, and still being able to see countryside at the very top, is always something that amazes me. It's strange for knowing how London is, and being in the small mini streets in Paddington or West Kensington or anywhere like that. Being able to see all of it from one location, seeing how small everything is a phenomenal experience. I would recommend going in the day. I've been in the day and I've been at night, and the nighttime was wonderful just for the expanse of lights. And it's a weird thing. London at nighttime on a night, there's a weird circle of very lit area, and it's almost dark around the outside. It's incredible. It's really bizarre. I'd recommend doing it during the daytime though, because you get to see more properly. And you can just take all of it in. You can see Waterloo Station, you can see Canary Wharf, you can see Big Ben, you can see so many different parts of it. And it's kind of, I remember seeing it for the first time. I was, I think just over 10 or so. And because I knew London so well from my 10-year-old height, seeing it elevated was just a mind-blowing experience. And that's the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, I remember being awestruck, and it literally felt like a jaw-dropping moment the first time I saw all of that. So for anyone who's going, I'd recommend that highly, more so than anything else. It's a little bit pricey, but I'd say it's definitely worth it.
Thank you very, very much. That is a strong recommendation. Yeah, I've never done it. I feel it's now a must. Yeah.
Oh, if you next time you find yourself in London, I can't recommend it enough. Honestly, it's worth the queue. And
you said you can see all the way to the countryside.
Yeah, you can see until it starts going green in the horizon. It's insane. It's incredible. It shows just how, despite the fact it's so big, it's still a bloody small country.
I think that's a perfect place to end it. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. And people can find you at British Bond Addict.
And it's absolutely correct on Instagram only. And thank you so much for having me on again, Thomas. It's been an absolute blast talking to you. I always have a great time doing it.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Okay, I feel very, very lucky to have had British Bond Addict here, and as a good friend. So I'm going to look at some of the other L's. Kid Bond fan, who I mentioned earlier, suggested L is for Lancashire, and I've often mentioned Yorkshire because I've lived there and worked there. I don't know Lancashire so well, but surely if you know Yorkshire, you should know Lancashire. It's a historic county, which of course fought the War of the Roses against Yorkshire from 1455 to 1487, that great war of succession, which kind of came after the 100 Years' War, and resulted in the House of Tudor. It is a historic county, kind of first really referenced in 1182 under King Henry II, and I'm getting that information from the Friends of Real Lancashire, because I was looking up information to do with Lancashire, and it seemed quite confused, and I feel once again a lot of my ideas about Lancashire are very out of date. I talked about this before when I was talking about Yorkshire, that as far as I knew historically there were 3 Yorkshires, east, west and north, and that's why we call them ridings. It comes from thirdings. And so I specifically remember being told there is no such thing as South Yorkshire, there's only 3. But my teachers at school obviously were hardly resisting these changes, which had happened long, long before. And there is a South Yorkshire in terms of administration, and it's much the same for Lancashire. I actually had an idea of a much bigger Lancashire, and historically it is, but the boundaries were changed on the 1st of April 1974 due to the Local Government Act 1972. That was said to be just an administration change. They said, the historic county, it won't really change. Of course, the historic county, had been set out in 1182. But there is now a movement, let's say, the Friends of Real Lancashire, formed in 1995, kind of pushing forward. Liverpool, Manchester, Warrington, etc. are still in Lancashire. So for administration purposes, they're not in administrative Lancashire, but they are in historic Lancashire. And I just started following through some of my interesting things that threw up. So again, I had in my mind that Todmorden was really the boundary between Yorkshire and Lancashire. And again, historically that was true. The boundary, how English is this, goes straight through the Todmorden cricket ground. So if you are coming in from Turnpike Road, then you are coming in through Yorkshire. If you are in the refreshment tent for players, officials and guests, then you're in Lancashire. If you're in Major Marshall's refreshment booth, you're in Yorkshire. And there used to be a tree right in the middle of the cricket ground, just away from the stumps actually, called the boundary tree, and that was considered the real boundary line until it was cut down in the 1870s. As recently as that. So very interesting. As I say, I've got a map which I got from that same Friends of Real Lancashire group, and as soon as I was looking at Lancashire, I couldn't help but look up the Duchy of Lancashire. So currently there's two royal duchies in England, the Royal Duchy of Lancaster and the Royal Duchy of Cornwall. So these are crown bodies. They're regulated by Acts of Parliament, and they're given some of the powers of, say, a corporation or a trust. And what these two duchies do is they invest primarily in land, and their income is payable either to the monarch or the monarch's oldest heir. I say they are regulated by Parliament, so they publish their annual accounts. So first of all, let's look at the Duchy of Cornwall, which is of course Prince Charles, and they publish their annual reports, and it's really interesting. It's like a standard financial report annual report for any major company, which I do find interesting. I studied finance, accounting and management for my masters, and so going through company annual reports and so on, I found the interesting things in it, I really liked it. So for example, just in the initial blurb of the Duchy of Cornwall's annual report 2020, to mark 50 years of the Duke of Cornwall as chairman of the Prince's Council, a total of 148 trees were planted at each principal mainland duchy farm and office, with special benches installed on the Isles of Scilly. So it provides the Duke of Cornwall, the Prince of Wales, with an income, and was created in 1337 by Edward III to provide an income for his son, Prince Edward, popularly known as the Black Prince. It's interesting, although I don't focus too heavily on history, I hope, as I'm not a historian, it is interesting how often Edward III comes up as a major shaper of the institutions of England and, to a certain extent, Britain. So I was looking at the Duchy of Cornwall, of course. Sticking to L, so the Duchy of Lancaster, the Duke of Lancaster is the Queen. And again, they're investing in land. The royal estates consist of 18,481 hectares of land in England and Wales, commercial land, agricultural, residential properties, the majority of which are in Lancashire, some in Yorkshire, Cheshire, Staffordshire and Lincolnshire. And then there's a significant commercial property portfolio in the Savoy precinct off the Strand in London. So I find that interesting. So what are these duchies all about? Again, it's a private estate of land, property and assets incorporated by royal charter and held in trust for the benefit of the monarch as Duke of Lancaster, and the monarch is entitled to the income generated by the duchy, but not entitled to the duchy's capital nor the capital profit. So land can be bought and sold and long leases granted, but sales of assets are strictly controlled and are sympathetic to retaining the duchy's core estates. So revenue generation is balanced against the need to provide an income for future generations of sovereigns. So this is as long-term investment as you can get. It's not investment for a person, it's investment for the person's heirs and descendants. I find that very, very interesting. And a lot of the income also goes to for the Duchy of Lancaster, a lot of the income goes to the Benevolent Fund, again set up with the consent of Her Majesty the Queen to benefit causes primarily within the County Palatine. Now, Lancashire as a county palatine, what does that mean? Well, palatine comes from the Latin for palatinus, relating to the palace, or from the noun palatium, so it's kind of a royal county, one in which the monarch has kind of direct authority, not through others, or not delegated to others. It is direct historically. And the Duchy Fund now covers the counties of Greater Manchester, Lancashire and Merseyside. The trustees of the fund invite a wide variety of community-based organisations and charitable causes within these three counties to apply for a donation that will benefit the local community. So again, it's interesting, a duchy investment for the Queen and for Prince Charles of Cornwall that supports charities in the region. Who manages this? Well, there's a council responsible to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. the Chancellor to the Sovereign for the Duchy's affairs. Appointments to the Council are made by the Queen on the recommendation of the Chancellor. So this gets into the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancashire. I think if you ask most British people who is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancashire, they won't know. And if you ask what is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancashire, it seems pretty obscure, and yet it is a cabinet position. It did come up in the news fairly recently. The Prime Minister changed some of the job descriptions, responsibilities and so on, just adding in a bit more. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, according to the British government website, administers the estates and rents of the Duchy of Lancaster and is a member of the Cabinet. After the Prime Minister, he is the most senior minister in the Cabinet office. Very straightforward. More senior, I guess, than the Chancellor of the Exchequer, responsible for all our finances, or the Foreign Secretary, but a lot less well known. Their responsibilities are extensive. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is responsible for the oversight of all Cabinet Office policy and appointments, oversight of the delivery of cost-cutting domestic and economic priorities, leading cross-government and public sector reform and efficiency, including digital and data reform, oversight of cross-government delivery of national policy and operational response to COVID-19. That's part of why it's been in the news more recently. Part of. Oversight of Cabinet Office responsibilities on national security and resilience, including the Civil Contingency Secretariat and cybersecurity. Again, that's another way this occasionally pushes into the news. Oversight of Cabinet Office work on science, technology, innovation, oversight of cross-government work on veterans issues, and oversight of constitutional advice, and that particularly came up thanks to Brexit. So again, it's sometimes considered to be like a minister with a portfolio. It is someone very, very senior in the government who, according to the description, can obviously take a kind of a longer view of things rather than just the day-to-day, but can also be assigned to specific issues as they arise. So it's a senior position in the government, one with a lot of history, and one that I say is not that well known in the UK. In fact, I had to really look this up, some of the details, as you can probably tell. I was checking all the government websites, and I've cut out as much of the chaff as I could. Yeah, so it's a member of the Cabinet. Who is the Cabinet? Well, the Cabinet are the most senior, political government appointees. The UK public elects 650 members of Parliament, so during the general election we just vote for our local representative to Parliament to represent our interests or concerns in the House of Commons, the lower chamber. And then MPs consider proposed new laws. The leader of the biggest party in the House of Commons can become the Prime Minister, and then they appoint their Cabinet. The Cabinet, of course, heading each of the major departments of state. But I'm not going to carry on too deep into that, because I was not asked about the House of Commons. Kane, long-time collaborator, said, how about L for the House of Lords? House of Lords is the second chamber of the UK Parliament, so classically the House of Commons is the one that creates a law. They'll vote on it, debate it, and so on and so on. Then it'll go up to the House of Lords for close consideration. Currently there are about 800 members who are eligible to take part in the work of the House of Lords. The majority are life peers, so that means they've achieved something outstanding in their life. They've been made a member of the House of Lords. They are normally specialists in a particular field. So any new law first gets introduced as a bill. It could be in the Lords. More commonly, I'd say it's in the Commons. The House will then debate, amend through a number of stages: first reading, second reading, committee stage, report stage, third reading. The bill then goes through the same process in the next House. Both the House of Commons and the House of Lords need to agree on the wording of the bill before it can gain royal assent. So that's approval from the Queen and become law. So both have to agree, with the exception, I believe, of finances. What happens if they don't agree? According to the Institute for Government, is best described as parliamentary ping-pong. If the houses don't agree on the wording of the bill, they just send the bill backwards and forwards to each other, responding to each other's proposed changes. I say it's known as parliamentary ping-pong, which I think is a fun term for it. And yes, this does not apply to annual finance bills. That's necessary for the business of government. But normally both houses will make every effort to reach compromise over a bill so it can become law. But again, on the government website is the statistics for government defeats in the House of Lords. 2019 to 2021, there were 14 debates. 2019 itself, just one. 2017 to 2019, 69, and then going back through each subsequent year, 60, 11, 14, 27. So it does happen. The government can be defeated in the Lords. It's one of our checks, one of our balances in our parliamentary system. I'd say historically there have been Lords more involved in government. So Lord Salisbury was a Prime Minister. Now, he may hold the record, we're not sure, of passing the least number of bills. So basically his government did nothing, and so he's held up as the archetype of a really good Prime Minister, somebody who did not pass too many wrong laws. It's a bit like there's the old story of the unjust king who asked his advisors, what is best that I should do? And his advisor said, the best thing for you is to sleep until midday so that none of your terrible judgments can affect mankind. So Lord Salisbury seemed to believe that about himself and believed in conserving the status quo. I'm just going to rattle a few quite quickly. On Instagram, 2 green thumbs suggested Leyland, the British car manufacturer, and I'm not a car expert. I was looking through, there is an interesting history which I feel could draw you in, but one thing that immediately drew me in was that Leyland had a quality control video called The Quality Connection, which I found on YouTube. Let me just read out the comments. The top 3 comments. The first is, the ending was more brutal than I expected. The second, British Leyland knew all about quality. How else would they have been able to so thoroughly avoid it at every opportunity? And the third comment was, basic British humour, Mr. Bean. Maximum British humour, British Leyland talking about quality. I feel that if you had never heard of British Leyland, these 3 comments on their quality control video, a quality connection, give a little insight into, well, how wonderful they were. 007 Islander on Instagram suggested L is for liver and onion. I've been sucked into all this research over Jaffa cakes recently, so I had a quick look. These liver and onions, something I want to cook, and then I found recipes by Jamie Oliver, by Gordon Ramsay, the Hairy Bikers on the BBC. They all have recipes for this classic British dish. Apparently it's only really common in Britain and maybe Germany. And then somebody in the Facebook group Britain People, Places and Pastimes was suggesting lager and lime. So L is for shandy. But again, the more I looked into this got 6 likes, so again, very, very popular in that Facebook group. There was one lady online, Christina Skusina, had an article called How to Make a Traditional British Shandy the Proper Way. Apparently there's been a little translation problem coming across the pond, so in an American bar you might not be getting what people in Britain think of as a lager and lime or a shandy, and it seems to be because the type of lemonade is different. So in the US that's lemon, sugar and water, whereas what we're using in the UK is apparently a lemon lime soda. So this is what we're referring to as lemonade. Again, this isn't one of my strong points, but so I kept checking that Jeanette Fouchy, a British expat in California, in 2017 did an article on traditional British shandy recipe. Again, a refreshing mix of lager beer and carbonated lemonade. Why is this so popular? According to Jeanette, the drinking age in the UK is 18, and shandy seems to have become the beverage for the young drinker in the UK. So I guess mixing half and half, the lemonade, or whatever you want to call it, and the lager waters it down sufficiently that it's not really considered an alcoholic beverage. So it's sometimes considered a training drink, and on a hot day can be very refreshing, apparently. Anyway, maybe I'll have a bit more of a look and cycle round when it's S. Lovely countryside was one suggestion. Again, plenty of likes on Facebook, and one fella just said, L is for lovely, in the alphabet of Britishness. Rather nice. I described some of my travels around the UK in the episode The UK, Not Just London, an exploration of Britain with Kane in Fuzhou, but I've been very fortunate to see a lot of the countryside in the UK. Many years ago, almost 10 years ago, I did the coast to coast cycle ride from Workington to Sunderland, and yeah, that's a journey of about 115 miles roughly. It took us 3 days because you start at, sea level, you go up and up and up to Heartsize Pass, which is at the top of the Pennines. Yeah. Okay, we're here at the top of Heartsize Mountain. We are very high. It's a very steep climb, so our eyes are burning. We're out of breath, mostly. It's been very hard. So what I can say is, I really hope the people of Gaza appreciate this suffering, because we are suffering here. And it's bloody cold too. It takes about 2 days to go up the mountain, and then it took me and my friend about, half a day, just over half a day, to just belt down the rest of that, the majority of the distance, but it was all downhill, zooming down, going through Keswick and Heartside Park. Took us through the Lake District, which is absolutely wonderful, although, as I recorded at the time, it was quite an arduous cycle ride, and yeah, we were doing this to raise money for an education charity. Hello, we're here at Rooker Pier after 3 hard days of cycling. It's been a fantastic journey. I don't remember most of yesterday, something about the pain barrier, I don't remember anything about it, but today was fantastic. Mostly going downhill, as you can see, should be having pretty good fish and chips soon. So we did well, a very memorable experience. So, happy to cover all the other topics, but L, by popular consensus, was for London. Really, there were no other contenders. So I thought, just give you a slice of life of London from Pete Brooker from Tailors with Love. So thank you very much, Pete, for sending this in. L is for London.
L is for London. L is for London. Pete Brooker here from Tailors with Love. Out with Roger. He's already curled a couple of out, so he's in good form this morning. In the background you'll hear some hustle and bustle, cars going by, people dropping off their kids to school, the beep beeps of the tube as people go through the contactless, the honks of horns as they tell their fellow commuters to get the fuck out of the way. There's not enough bins in London. That's something you'll find when you come to London. As dog walkers especially, carrying around a bag of dog poo for over 5 minutes. Yeah, I don't know why they've done away with a lot of the bins recently around here. I do often think though, I suppose, I'll tell you what, just a thought. Wait, Rog, wait. Just a thought on London. We don't have any weapons here, like guns. Guns aren't really known or synonymous with London. Rog, this way, we're going home. But I tell you what you do have here is knives. Knife crime. Knife crime in London. Rog, come on! Jesus Christ. That's to sniff every fucking letterbox. Sorry. Crossing a couple of roads here. But my theory is to all those people here in London that carry knives, don't carry knives. You know what's more dangerous than knives are dog walkers with bags of dog poo in their hand. That's right. I think if you're a gang member and you want to put the fear of God in someone in the middle of a street fight, all you got to do is flash open a bag of dog poo and go, I'm going to fucking mush this in your face, and they'd run to the hills, and there'd be no knife crime. All right, come on, Rog, come on. Oh, in London, I'll tell you something else. A bit of a myth about London is that in this season, with all the leaves on the ground, you think, don't you just love the greens and browns and reds of the autumnal leaves on the pavement? You don't get any of that because the weather is so bad here. It rains, the leaves just turn to mush and shit, and Honestly, the streets are just paved in this slippery mush. But Roger doesn't mind that, do you, Rog? Yeah, you're a fan of the mush. Fan of the mush. So, I'm in Chiswick, by the way. Chiswick, West London, 20 minutes away from Heathrow, and about 20 minutes the other way is the action, Central London. Do recommend Chiswick. There's not really much to see here. You got, if you're a Bond fan, that is, you've got Brent Cross, which is the car park that Bond drove around in Tomorrow Never Dies. But there's really not much there apart from the car park. Rog, come on. Oh, you do have Timothy Dalton living here, apparently. Never seen the man, but he is a Chiswickian. I do know his exact address, by the way, in Chiswick, and I sent him a letter with, because I requested an interview for the book, so I sent him a letter and I posted it with one of the Timothy Dalton stamps that they did with the 007 stamp collection, which I thought could have prompted a response, but nay, he did not reply. So, but that's the thing about London. I mean, I didn't know that before moving to Chiswick, that Timothy Dalton was a Chiswickian, and I think when you come to London, it's just full of surprises for Bond fans. I saw on an Instagram post yesterday from a mate Joe, he was at the lift that Sean Connery was filming Diamonds Are Forever when Bond has the fight with Peter Franks. Thought that was a studio for some reason. No, it's an actual lift. I said, Joe, where's this? He goes, it's in Fleet Street. I said, I'm going there. I'm going to the lift. So, you never know what's around the corner, is what I'm saying in London. Talking of corners, Rog, you can't go up that driveway. It's not yours. Rog likes to whiz on other people's hubcaps, which I try and deter, unless it's this guy's car, because I don't like this guy. It's my neighbour. He's a bit of a dickhead. Rog, do you fancy whizzing on this one? I give you a license. Only on this one. No? All right, Thomas. We're getting home now. Thank you for all you've done, supporting my show and obviously the great work you do on yours. And yeah, target is London. Rog, let's get inside. Fuck up my keys, you know. Have we already done F? Because F is for fucking freezing. Ugh.
Hello, just in case you thought I'd forgotten. I do have a recommended rabbit hole for this week, and my recommended rabbit hole is, of course, London Sands, my brother's company. Just go have a look. It's really interesting, it's really artistic, it's creative. So he's on Instagram. You can find him on a few other websites, I believe, but Instagram is where it's really at. So that's my recommended rabbit hole for this week. Please do check it out.